Thanks for coming. Just kidding. Let me introduce myself. Bruce Kimbrell. I come to you from the west coast of the U.S., Disneyland. How many of you have been to Disneyland? Oh, beautiful. Look at that. I love this audience. I began my Disney career 42 years ago on the world-famous Jungle Cruise. How many have been on the Jungle Cruise? All right. Is anyone, and I'm going to use this term, mature enough to say that they may have been on the Jungle Cruise 40 years ago at Disneyland? Anybody, a couple of you in the audience? You were probably on my boat, I'm sure. I took about 15,000 trips on that attraction. Can you imagine? Yeah, first 2,000 were pretty cool. Actually, they were all cool. And I've had 17 different careers at the Walt Disney Company in that now almost 42-year period. I've been in HR, been in marketing, had an opportunity to work at our parks a bit overseas in Tokyo and in Hong Kong. Spent a lot of time with my colleagues like Sean at Walt Disney World, and then traveled with the Disney Institute in the last 15 years of my career around the globe, and figured that I had been around the world about 13 times with Disney. So as Disney would put it, and I'm sure some of you may remember this, right? For me, it was a great e-ticket ride. Very good. All right. So I hope you can join us for 7 of these presentations. We're going to talk about really the theme parks and a little bit about some of the magic behind the theme parks and what makes the theme parks what they are. I spent 25 years in operations with Disney's theme parks, and I really came to a very clear understanding of how they operate, but the magic that really makes them what they are. And so that was a beautiful opportunity. And then went out and taught that to corporations and really taught about our leadership and talked about how we operate, how we hire people, how we train people, all of that. So the next 5 mornings, I know Monday through Friday, we're here at 9:30. There's a couple day breaks, and then there's 2 more sessions after that. So we'd love to see you, right, at each of those. So I want to talk a little bit about the magic of Main Street. And Main Street is, we're going to look at Disneyland's Main Street. There's our beautiful castle out there. And this is really America circa 1890, 1910. Or at least it's supposed to be America circa 1890, 1910. But quite frankly, this really is not a representation of America circa 1890, 1910. Because no America was ever this clean. No America was ever this friendly. And no America was really ever this safe. But this is a personification of the perfection. If you and I could create our perfect Main Street America, this is probably something that we would like to see it be, if you would. This is what Walt Disney Imagineering defines as storybook realism. Life, if we could have it be this way, it would be fantastic. But there's some interesting things that are going on this Main Street in particular. We're going to talk about those in just a few minutes. But where do the origins of Main Street come from? And the idea of 1890, 1910. A lot of people think that's interesting. Why would you enter a theme park into America of that era? Well, because that's the era that Walt Disney came from and the one that he remembered as a small child. Speaking of that, of course, he lived in Marceline roughly from the ages of 3 to 7. So that had a big influence on him. The Santa Fe Railroad came through there, had a big influence on him. And a lot of people are under the understanding that fully the main streets that are in our theme parks were designed after Marceline, Missouri, which is in part true, but not in totality. The town was founded in 1887. This is a picture of the street somewhere between 1890 and 1910. This is a picture of the street as it stands today. Walt Disney visited, and his brother Roy Disney visited Marceline on a couple of occasions. Uses some pictures of them in 1946 when they visited their hometown. And this definitely, absolutely, positively was a story of local boy makes good, without fail. His boyhood home is there, and it still stands today. This is the front of the home. It's actually been added onto in the back with about 3,500 square feet of living space. It is actually owned by Kay Mallons. which is really fascinating to me because if you go to Highway 36, you pull over, you get out of your car, and you walk up to the door and you knock on it, chances are, 9 times out of 10, almost 10 times out of 10, Kay will answer the door. And if you said to Kay, Kay, I'd like to go up and see Walt Disney's room that he grew up as a little boy, she'll take you up and she'll show you the room. She's very generous. And her father, Rush, bought the farm from some folks many, many years ago, and they are still there, and she still lives at Walt Disney's home and preserves it actually very beautifully. All right, but we're going to move a little bit beyond Marceline because you see these 3 gentlemen, Imagineers, John Hench, top, Herb Ryman, and then Harper Goff. Harper Goff grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado. That is his hometown. Are you from Fort Collins? Look at you. Hello, Harper, too. All right. Interesting because Harper Goff was the artist that created the main streets that you see in Disney theme parks. And so Harper was really influenced, very strongly influenced by his hometown of Fort Collins, Colorado. So here's some pictures of Main Street. There's Harper, who played the banjo. We're going to talk a little bit about him tomorrow and the next day, if you will. So if you look at these photographs of current day Fort Collins, Colorado, founded in 1864, a little older than Marceline. It might look a little bit, as you can see, like the main streets that you see in Disney theme parks around the world. Beautiful flowers, right? So you can see maybe where the influence of that architecture came when he was designing Main Street for Disney. The windows, the awnings, the doors. But let's talk about some of the secrets of the main streets that are in the Disney parks. Some things that are very interesting and some things that really a lot of people probably don't know about certain details that are fun but very factual. And one of them happens to do with this flagpole. Does this look familiar to you? Yeah. Town Square, Main Street. All right. As I'm facing the castle and I'm looking north, behind me is the train station. The dedicatory plaque is at the base of this. And I want to talk about the base of that flagpole and where we came to get that. You just saw a picture of John Hench 2 photos ago. And John Hench was originally an artist and an animator, and then John became an Imagineer. In fact, if you go to a Disney theme park, I can tell you that most of the color schemes that you see and a lot of the theming that you experience in those parks is because of John Hench. We're going to talk a little bit about more John Hench in the next day or so. But I had heard a story about John Hench, and I didn't know if it was true or not. And I thought, I'm going to talk to John Hench, and I'm going to ask him if, in fact, that story that he told is true. And I had a lot of encounters with John, and at one point we had met, and I said, listen, I heard a story about you and the flagpole in Town Square and Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles. And he kind of laughed, and he said, that story's true. And I said, well, can you tell it to me? I'd like to hear it from you. He said, sure. So he said, I was on Santa Monica Boulevard, and he said, I had been coming from the studio at Burbank. I was on my way to the property in the construction that was going on in Anaheim for Disneyland. He said, I all of a sudden was stopped in a traffic jam, and he said, I'd parked for several minutes, not moving forward. And he said, I realized that there was some problem going on. So he said, I actually got out of my car, and he said, I walked forward toward where I thought the problem was. And he said there was a problem. It was an accident, an automobile accident. Somebody had hit a light post, and there were a lot of vintage posts along Santa Monica Boulevard. And he said there's a lot of commotion, a lot of people over where the actual accident had occurred. And he said this car had hit the pole and then veered off and hit some more cars. But this was the base of the pole that had been hit. And it was laying on the sidewalk. And he said, wouldn't that be a great addition to Disneyland? So he went over there, he grabbed it, he walked back to his car and he put it in the trunk. He turned around on Santa Monica Boulevard, he told me, and he found another route to Disneyland. And there is that base of that pole from Santa Monica Boulevard. Yeah, it's a little inside tale about John Hench. Okay, all right. So Main Street, interesting, from the south end of the street by the train station to the north end, which is what they call the Plaza Hub, just in front of the park here, the street actually narrows by almost a foot, and the buildings literally get shorter. And I don't know if you've noticed or you've seen that before, but next time you're in the park and you look at the buildings on the south side of the street by Town Square, from the opposite end toward the hub, you're going to see a definite difference in the actual size of the buildings, if you will. All of the buildings are done in soft, kind of muted pastels. The reason for this is psychological. If you go out into the real world, the world that you and I come from, there's a lot of competition, right? Some buildings may be very garish and bright, right? Some may not be. There's a lot of difference going on out there. You don't see that type of competition in these buildings, if you will. And the reason for those soft blended pastels is really, quite frankly, in all honesty, to disarm you, right? What they want to do is they want to calm you down, and they don't want you to feel that there's any competition in that environment, which is something that you and I are used to, if you will, when we go out into the real world. So that makes this a more pleasant experience, if you will. All the buildings are done to 5/8 of scale. Why 5/8 of scale? And why wasn't everything built to regular scale? Because 5/8 of scale creates an intimacy for you at a psychological level. And it really brings this fantasy closer to your everyday reality. And that also becomes something that is disarming. That 5/8 of scale is interesting because if I literally stood in the window of this building, my feet would be through the ceiling of the floor below me. If you look at that, right? That's called forced perspective, looking like 3 stories, but not literally in measurement 3 stories at all. Also known, of course, as forced perspective. I apologize for the blurriness of this photo, but this photo is very difficult to find, and there really are probably only 2 of these that exist, but an interesting story about this wall in particular. So if you see this wall, it's actually sitting on wheels, believe it or not. They finally put it on wheels. But this wall is a demo. And during the 1-year and 1-day construction of Disneyland, they used this wall as a sampling of the types of brick textures that they wanted to create on the buildings of the street. So what the designers, the builders would do is they would move this. This is the Emporium train station, obviously without its tower yet. You're facing south in this direction. They would move this throughout the park, and they would use all of these textures, if you will, so the artisans could copy that on the buildings as they were creating each of the facades. So they really got attached to this. They really got attached to this after a year, and they kind of hated to see it go. They wanted to kind of keep this around. So what they did is they took it here to what is known as East Center Street, right around here. We're going to get closer to this area right here and see that this is where they parked it. And it's there today. So if you go to the park, you go halfway up the street, and you go on to the right, correct? Disney Clothiers is just behind me, and then what is now Starbucks at the French Market is to my right. Look at the different textures that you can see, right? And coloring in this brick, right? They took the wheels off. This is a backstage access for cast members. If you go through this door and around to the back of that, you can see the old wood is there, and it's all still the same from 1954. It's fascinating, right, to see that. So now go get your picture right by that. I've got my picture there, all right. I want to introduce you to the $2,500 trash can. These trash cans are extremely expensive. Not because we pay $2,500 for them, we don't. I don't think anybody would pay $2,500 for a trash can. These trash cans are about $160 a piece. But it's interesting because this trash can, we're going to talk a little bit about this on about day 6, is an invention of Walt Disney's. And it's called the Litter Guard. The company that helped to invent it, we made millionaires. Because this really became the standard of the industry, if you think about it. The trash can itself is for what? The collection of garbage. And I think that most people out there who run a business and actually have the utilization of a trash can are not going to necessarily be too concerned about how their garbage cans look. What's interesting about that is that Walt Disney was very interested about how his trash cans looked. And the reason why is because he referred to this as a touch point or a moment of truth, indicating early on that everything everybody came in contact with was what he also defined as a moment of truth. In other words, anything and everything in the environment speaks to you as a consumer. So I could look at that literally and think about that all the way down the line and consider every single component and aspect of that, or I could just ignore some of it. So I'm sure if we survey the audience, that all of you could tell stories about companies or brands that you have interchanged or exchanged with who probably don't care about every aspect of their business. And there are multiple aspects of that business that they just let go because they don't see any value in it. What's interesting about that is that Walt Disney even saw value in trash cans. So he wanted to make sure that the trash cans not only were receptacles for garbage, but that they were also show pieces. And that these show pieces spoke to you as an audience. That they didn't detract from the show, but that they in fact became part of the show and could be themed into that environment. I know some of these in Adventureland that might be themed like bamboo or sometimes hard to find because they're so well themed into their environment, if you will. All right, one of the things that Disneyland in particular in Orange County, California is known for are its flowers. It's a horticultural landmark and it is a registered horticultural site, if you will. Now I know as a kid living up in Sacramento, having been born and raised there, we used to take our yearly trip to Southern California and to Disneyland. And every year we'd go there. It was a tremendous vacation. We were only there a couple days, didn't have a lot of money. Went one day, drove down, went to Disneyland the next day, got in the car and drove back home. Wasn't a big trip, but it was very memorable. And I remember that these beautiful gardens in the park were just that. They were beautiful. So fast forward a number of years, I actually went to Disneyland, applied for a position, got a job, started on the Jungle Cruise, and I had been working there for probably about 6 months, and I got a call from my mother in Sacramento. And she said, I have a question for you. I said, sure. So I'd like you to do something for me. I said, okay, what's that? She said, could you talk to somebody down there at Disneyland, and could you find out why their flowers always look so nice? And I said, yeah, okay. And she went down this list, right? She said, well, you know, is it because of where they buy them? She said, is it the fertilizer? Is it the when they water it? Right? You know, she said, well, there's got to be some magic, right, to why these gardens are always so gorgeous. These hanging pots are always so beautiful. So every time I go there, everything's so perfect. And I said, you know, let me check that out. So I talked to some horticulturists, I talked to some landscapers, and the answer was the same. It was a single word answer. It was extremely simple, and they all gave me the same answer. So I knew that in that consistency, I knew that had to be the answer, that what they told me was right, that this is what created the magic of these beautiful floral arrangements throughout the parks. So I called my mother back in Sacramento, and it had been maybe a week or so, and I said, hey, listen, I talked to those horticulturists, I talked to the landscapers at Disneyland, and they told me what the answer to this was. And I said, it's a single word, it's not complicated, it's very easy, and they all gave me the same answer. And she said, well, what is it? And she went down her list again. You know, she said, is it the water? Is it the, where they buy them? She said, it's got to be fertilizer. What is it? I said, no, Mother, the answer is money. And she said, oh, okay. They advised me very clearly that every planter on cycles, not all of them at once, but on cycles, are replaced every 21 days. That every lawn in the park is replaced every 42. And that's why it always looks so great. And what's great about that is that, willingly, quite frankly, you and I pay for that, right? We do. We pay for that. And we're real happy about that because, quite frankly, when we go there, that is that storybook realism, right, that we talk about. And that's that theme, that's that show that probably isn't reality. I don't think you're realistically going to drive through any town, anywhere in the world, except maybe Tivoli Gardens, right, where Walt Disney got inspired to do all this great work, and see this type of reality come to life. But they do there, and we love that, right? Because we love to see how great it can be, or how beautiful we would like it to be all the time. And that's what this was. That's what this was about. So flowers every 21, lawns every 42, and then a little bit here about lighting. So usually when we left the park after we were there for the day, it was late, fireworks had gone off, Tinkerbell had flown, the parade had been run, and we were tired and we were ready to go. So we'd make that trek back down Main Street on our way out to the car, and my dad would always say the same thing. We'd walk down that street, and he said, how do they keep all these lights burning like this? What's going on here? I'm trying to figure out, there got to be more burnout bulbs here than, I don't see any bulbs burn out. Now, every once in a while, you'll see a bulb burn out, right? But it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. And he wanted to know, because I'll tell you, on Main Street alone, there are 10,000 light bulbs. Right? I don't care where you come from, that's a lot of light. And they're still incandescent. They're not LED. And why would they be incandescent? Pardon? The feel, yeah. You're hitting it. The reality of the time. Exactly. How could I put an LED light in and call it 1890, 1910 America, when at that time, the gas lamp was giving way to the light bulb? So if I'm going to tell the story, and if I'm going to tell the story right, I've got to be true to the history of it. There aren't a lot of people, quite frankly, that are making 10,000 incandescent light bulbs every day. So in reality, there are only a couple of companies in the United States who can supply Disney theme parks worldwide with these bulbs, because these bulbs just aren't around every corner anymore. So a lot of those that you'll see on the Mark Twain riverboat, or that you'll see in these areas, these park areas, are specially created for Disney parks only because they're the only ones making them anymore. So I thought about that. You've got over 10,000 lights on this street, and imagine trying to keep these bulbs lit all the time. There's a little bit of insanity, right? So can you imagine, if you will, the park closes and they bring a lift out, right? And now with that lift, they're going to go around and they're going to try to find every burnout light. You know how fast a lift moves? This is it. This is top speed of the lift right here, right? Going down the street. It would take forever. With 10,000 bulbs, I mean, this, hey, when you're over there, I got a bulb over here, it would be prohibitive. There's no way that you could do that. And I thought about what my dad had said for years, going down that street, that he was so amazed that you could go down that street and these lights would be burning, and you'd have very few that were not, if any. It was difficult to find an extinguished bulb. So I found some lampers, some electricians, and I said, what's the secret, or is there a secret? How do you do that? Because it would take a crew of I don't know how many if you wanted to go through and just replace them all at once one night, all 10,000 bulbs. If this bulb is out right here, right? Or this bulb is out right here. Why do you think that might be true? How many bulbs do we buy? Okay, the answer is a lot, right? Do you think it's possible that we buy bulbs and that some of them are duds? Or maybe don't live out their life expectancy? It's true. So here's the secret. They will take a section of a building like this, all right, and they will lamp it. And what they'll do is they will allow, and this number they found mathematically, give or take a few percents, they will allow those lights to burn to 87% of their life expectancy per manufacturer's specifications. On the date of 87 percentile, these lights are still burning bright for the most part, right? They'll get up on the lift, they'll take all those lights out, they'll replace them, and they'll start that dating process over again. And that's how they keep the lights burning bright on Main Street. Otherwise, it'd be really difficult, right? And that right there is a dud. That is a dud. And didn't live to its full life expectancy, right? If you think about it. All right. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Coke Corner. Coke Corner is one of the original sponsors from 1955 and has been with Disney and Disney theme parks worldwide since then. So when you go to Coke Corner here at the top of Main Street on the left, you will see that famous red background and that very famous white cursive script. And then you see these light bulbs, red, white, coinciding with the theme and the logo that is very popular for Coke for years. Well-known location, sells hot dogs, et cetera, has been there since opening day and really hasn't necessarily changed. Now it's interesting because when they were building the park, and as I mentioned earlier, maybe the park took 1 year and 1 day to build. They were building it under 1954 code. And quite frankly, not the most precise measurements or not the most precise execution in what it is they did. So what they found out is when they were lamping this building with red and white bulbs here, that they got to one section of the building and they were off. Which really kind of drove them crazy because they knew what a perfectionist Walt Disney was. And they realized that a couple of things had to happen in this particular area where they were off. So they said, well, one of two things is going to happen here. We either have to cover the socket, right, so it isn't exposed, re-engineer this so there isn't a socket there, or have two white bulbs together, or two red bulbs together. And none of those answers were the right answer because of the type of or level of perfectionist that Walt Disney was. And what they knew was, as he was very much into detail and the details of the detail, that if they did any of those things that they had mentioned, that somehow, somewhere, at some point, he would find out, quite frankly, and as a perfectionist, he would not be very happy with that. And then he would demand that some change be made so that they could bring it in line with this personification of the perfection, right? This idealistic, if you will, storybook living, as it's called. So here's what they did. They especially manufactured a bulb. We still make these bulbs. We're the ones that do this with a very special paint that takes high heat. And when you screw it in and it's tight in its socket, the red side is to the white bulb, the white side is to the red bulb. And that is how they solved that problem. That bulb is right there. Absolutely. And Walt Disney was very happy with the outcome, right, of this. Interesting. So the next time you're at Disneyland and you're on Main Street and you're at the top of Main Street, you may go to Coke Corner and you can point up and take your picture with this half bulb, right? Half bulb, very interesting. So interesting from a standpoint of what makes Main Street a Main Street. We go to that park, we walk down that street, everybody enters the park only through that street. Everybody exits the park only through that street. There are no other entrance or exits for guests. Sometimes we take a little bit for granted. It's really an entrance corridor in a lot of ways, right? If you're like anybody else who goes to Disneyland, you go to the park and you walk down that street, you pass everything by, you're on your way out. At night, you might sit there during the day at one point, or the night at one point, watching a parade, and then at night you're kind of exiting out. And if you're like other guests, you might stop in the Emporium, which is the main merchandise location, gather whatever souvenirs you might, or as we like to call them at Disney, tangible memories, and then out you go, right? You're on your way. But there's a lot of different things that are going on there, right, that most of us probably aren't necessarily aware of. And we don't want you to be aware of those things, right? Disney doesn't want you to walk down the street any given day and say, okay, now stop just a second. I think it's really important that the people in our group, before we enjoy our day at Disneyland, understand this 5/8 of scale thing and the importance of why these buildings are 5/8 of scale, what that psychologically is doing for us, and how the intimacy of this, right, this act is really bringing the reality, that fantasy closer to our reality. We don't care about that. But there is a reason for that. There's a reason for the pastel colors and the disarming, right, for you. If you go out in the world, you're going to see that type of competition. And you don't see that, and you don't feel that. You don't think that, though. So you're not standing in that environment thinking, wow, this is really kind of appealing from a standpoint of it is comfortable and it relaxes me. We don't want you to think that. Subliminally, we want you to experience that, but we don't want you to, in a frontal way, think of that. Just like the lights. You know they work. Great. The trash cans. Very interesting. Because, not that we believe that everyone who comes to the park is a slob, but there are a lot of people who are slobs who come to the park. So Walt Disney once said that trash breeds trash. What he meant by that was this. If you keep a place clean, he said, people respect it. If you let it get dirty, they'll make it worse. So when we talk a little bit about the first manager of custodial in the next couple of days, we're going to get into more detail about how that became reality of keeping that park clean all the time. But one of them was that trash can that I showed you in the litter guard. And the fact that there are so many trash cans in Disneyland alone. There are 860 trash cans in that park. Why? Because there's a lot of trash produced. But why? Because you and I, as human beings, quite frankly, are a little lazy. And Walt Disney knew this. So before he opened Disneyland, there was a lot of work done with Stanford Research Institute up in the Bay Area. And Stanford told him a lot about walkways and flow of traffic and all of those types of things, even about facial hair. And one of the things that they told him, for example, about facial hair is this. They said, we've done a study, and it was almost 2 years. And what the study proved was this, and you ask why we didn't initially have facial hair at Disneyland. Because in the study, Stanford said that they found out that children 10 years of age and younger would not only hesitate, but would not approach a male with facial hair. And so the decision was made not to allow anybody at Disney to have facial hair because of that. And they said, well, wait, Walt Disney had a mustache. That's true, he did. But Walt Disney never worked at Disneyland. And they knew him by television, right? We'll talk a little bit about that too. So then Stanford went to Disney and said, there's something else that we think would be very interesting for you to know. It's another basic 2-year study that we did on trash. And they said, he said, okay, what was the study about? And they said it was about habit and the habit of a human being who has trash to throw away. And he said, I want to know more about it. And they said, we have discovered through our study that if you or I, as a human being, have something in our hand that we want or need to throw away, that on average, we will take about 30 steps. And if at or around that 30 pace point, we do not have a receptacle to throw it in, guess what we'll do with it? Yeah, slob. We'll drop it on the ground, right? Yeah, we'll just throw it on the ground because there's nowhere to put it. So what they told him he should do was place those trash cans 27 or less paces apart throughout the park to beat you at the game of keeping the park clean. And what they said, what Stanford said was this: your guest, if you do that, we believe through our study, will help you keep your park clean. And that's why there are 860 trash cans in the park, because that's how many it takes to cover 110 acres at 27 paces apart. But we like that, correct? Because we see people in the park who probably normally would not throw it away because they see how clean the surface of the park is, and they say to themselves, I'm not going to be the first person to soil this surface. And they find a trash can and they throw it away. And normally they probably wouldn't do that, but they do it there. And then they go home and then they throw the trash back on the floor, right? Yeah. Their underwear on the ceiling fan, the watermelon rinds are out in the front yard, blah, blah, blah. So, simple things that before might have been not thought of, a detail that maybe somebody wasn't necessarily curious about or interested in or thought had any value, have value. Because no one's necessarily going to go into a park like that and start talking about trash cans, right? Or light bulbs. They might talk about planters and the lawn, but they're not going to talk about 5/8 of scale or any of that, the coloring of the place necessarily. But all of those things play a part, if you will, in the magic that you enjoy in the theme park, and the reason why you go, and the reason why you want to come back. And we don't necessarily think you need to put your hand on that by definition. But Walt Disney once said this: when people come to my park and they've enjoyed their day there, and when they're getting ready to leave, and they do, and they walk out that exit gate, once they've walked out that exit gate, I want them to stop, and I want them to turn back to my park, and this is what I want them to say: gosh, I wish the rest of my life were like that. And that is what he was perpetually trying to achieve every day. And I can tell you, as an operator of those parks for a quarter of a century, it is not an easy task. It is a battle. It is extremely underlined, bolded. It is extremely expensive to do. But it is worth it because you love it and you come back. And what's really great about that is you go out, thank you very much, and you tell people, guess what you need to do? You need to go to Disney. All right. Thank you very much. I'll stick around for a few